I am a C. I am a CH. I am a CHRISTIAN. For I have CHRIST in my HEART, and I will LOVEETERNALLY. I am a C. I am a CH. I am a CHRISTIAN. For I have CHRIST in my HEART, and I will LOVEETERNALLY. Good evening, and welcome to Kids Corner this evening. Hope you've had a great day today and a great week so far. I'm singing that song, I am a CH. I am a Christian because I have Jesus in my heart, and I want to love Him, and I know He'll love me eternally. And that's what that song is about. So I haven't sang that song in a really long time. Wanted to sing that this evening. I brought something with me today to show you. What is this? Can you tell me what this is? That's right. It's a crutch. I'm gonna turn it where you can see most of it. There we go. It's a crutch. And what do we use a crutch for? We use a crutch whenever we have an injury, a leg injury of some kind. Either we hurt our foot, we break our ankle, or we break our leg. Maybe we have a knee injury, something like that. Have you ever had to use crutches? Maybe some of you have. Maybe some of you have crutches in your house somewhere in a closet or something like that because you had to use them, or a parent had to use them, or brother or sister. And the hope is that with crutches, when we have an injury like that to a leg or a knee or an ankle or a foot, the hope is that, number one, that person won't have to use them forever. It's just a short period of time that they have to use it to allow the leg or knee or ankle or foot, whatever, to allow that injury to heal. We use the crutches so we don't put pressure on it and we don't put weight on it. But it's only for a short period of time that we have to use crutches. And then when it heals and we don't have to use them anymore and we can walk again normally, the crutches usually go in a closet like we talked about, or in the basement, or in the attic, or maybe even to somebody else who needs them, or the secondhand store or something like that. Typically we don't how many of y'all would take your crutches and hang them on the wall? Or maybe you put them on the mantle of your fireplace at home, to honor those crutches for the short period of time that they helped you out, to honor the help that they gave you. I don't know anybody who would do that. Seems kind of silly to think about, doesn't it? And the reason is because we don't like to remember those kinds of things. We don't like to remember the injuries that we have, or the pain that came with those injuries, and so we don't want to put things up that help us to remember those things. And same way with illnesses, we don't necessarily want to remember those things, and so we don't put things up on the walls or the mantle or on a shelf that remind us of those things. It's kind of like when you get really, really sick and maybe throw up a lot, and you throw up eating a certain kind of food. It becomes very difficult to eat that food again because it reminds us every time of how sick we were and that we were throwing up eating that food. That's why I can't eat sweet potatoes. Got really sick on them one time, and so I usually steer clear of sweet potatoes because I don't want to remember that. There's a story in the Bible. It's about a group of men who had a terrible, terrible illness. The illness was called leprosy. Leprosy was an awful illness, and in the Bible times, there was no cure for it. There is a cure now, but there was no cure for it then. And if you got leprosy, it was a yucky skin disease that would make your skin get sores on it and really yucky and start to fall off, to flake off, and it was really, really contagious as well. So nobody wanted to be around you. In fact, they would make you live outside of town if you had leprosy. There's a story in the Bible, in the book of Luke, chapter 17, about a group of men that had this disease, and it was, like I said, uncurable unless you met somebody like Jesus. Leprosy was the kind of thing you had until the day you die. But in this story, something interesting happened. I'm going to read it to you. Chapter 17 from the book of Luke, starting in verse 11. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Or where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except for this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." So what are some things we learn from this particular story from the book of Luke? Well, first of all, Jesus told the lepers to go show themselves to the priests. And the reason that he told them that was that a priest was the only person who could officially tell these men or anybody that they were healed of leprosy or other diseases. And so it was a priest that would have to pronounce that, and so that's why Jesus told them to go show themselves to the priests. And as they turned and walked away to head to the priests, they looked down and realized all of a sudden that they didn't have leprosy. Can you imagine what that felt like? They'd heard about this guy, and all of a sudden he was in their area, so here was their chance. And so they ran to find him and said, have pity on us, please have pity on us, because nobody wanted that disease. And Jesus told them to go to the priests, and they were healed. And so one of the things that we learn is this. Well, what we see with these guys is that as soon as Jesus told them what to do, they just turned around and they just did it. Is your faith and my faith so strong that when we're told to do something, when Jesus tells us to do something, that we just do it without asking why, without trying to come to understanding? We just do it because Jesus tells us to do it. That's what these 10 men did. Now, there were some other issues with that, but they did. They turned around and they just went and did what Jesus told them to do. And so that's one of the things we learn from this story, is that we are called to do what Jesus tells us to do, and we're called to do it in faith. We're called to do it without having to always know the why, without having to know what the result is going to be, but simply doing it because Jesus tells us to do it. And so we learned that. Second of all, we learn that thanksgiving is very important. Out of all of those guys, there were 10 of them. Out of 10 men, only one man was so grateful that he didn't have leprosy anymore that he came back. He turned around and he ran back to Jesus to tell him, "Thank you. Thank you for healing me of this awful, awful disease, this incurable disease. Thank you for doing that for me." And thanksgiving is super, super important. God, he doesn't always, he doesn't demand necessarily that we thank him, but he appreciates it when we thank him, and he's very pleased when we thank him. And when we thank him, we come to a better understanding of him. We come to a better understanding of who he is and our relationship with him. We grow in our faith in him, and he blesses us in special ways. And so we learn that Thanksgiving is super important. I think those guys were excited. And sometimes I think that, we receive and people receive good gifts from God even when we're not thankful. But when we are thankful, the gift is that much better, and we get much more because we grow. Not only do we get the benefits of that gift, but we grow spiritually in our relationship with God. And so that's a really good thing. Another interesting thing from this story, the guy that came back and said thank you, who was he? What kind of a person was he? He was a Samaritan. Okay? He was a Samaritan. And if you remember, back in the book of Matthew, there's a story about the Good Samaritan. And remember, the Samaritans, they were a group of people that the Jews did not like. They did not like them at all. And Jesus told that parable of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And then he tells, and then he, then we have this situation as well. And what Jesus is showing us in his actions here, and also in that parable, is that God's grace is for everybody. God's grace is for everybody. So it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your name is. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter any of those things. It doesn't matter what your past looks like. God's grace is for everybody. And he showed that by healing the Samaritan along with these other men. The Jews had a hard time with that sometimes because they thought they were God's chosen people and that God's grace was only for them. And Jesus came along and said, no, it's not that way. My love is for everybody. My grace is for everybody. My forgiveness is for everybody. And so we learned that from this story as well, as he healed the Samaritan. And the Samaritan was the only one who came back and said, thank you. Now, it's easy to put our bad times behind us. And most of the time is a good thing. We kind of store them away. We kind of hide them partly because we just want to move forward and move on from them. And that's a good thing, to move forward from them. But sometimes, too, we need to remember. We need to remember who it is that carries us through the hardships. We need to remember how God worked in our lives through those hardships. And sometimes we need to remember and be able to share with somebody else that's going through a hard time. And we share our hard time with them as well, so they can see that they can see how God worked in our lives as well. And so sometimes it's a good thing to remember those things that we go through. We certainly need to remember to give thanks to God, knowing that he'll always be there to carry us through any and in every hardship. We need to make sure we say thank you. It's kind of hard to say thank you for the hard things, isn't it? We don't always want to say thank you for the hard thing I had to go through, the hard experience, the pain. Those are hard things to say thank you for, but if we turn those things over to God and we let God work in our life and grow us through those things, we can look back and see the great things that he did, and certainly then say thank you for helping me through those things. Hope that gives you something to think about a little bit. And go back and read that story again in Luke chapter 17. You can go back and read the story of the Good Samaritan back in the book of Matthew. Read that with your mom and dad and talk about that story as well and the things that you learned from that story. Hope that you have a great evening and a great rest of your week this week. Sure miss you guys, and we'll see you on Sunday, and certainly see you next time on Kids Corner.